So having seen First Steps, I thought I'd take a look back at Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, once again directed by Tim Story, starring everybody from the previous film: Ewan Gruffudd, Jessica Alba, Chris Evans, and Michael Chiklis, with a few new faces in the mix, from Lawrence Fishburne as the voice of the Silver Surfer, Andre Braugher, and Doug Jones doing the physical portrayal of the Silver Surfer. I wasn't able to get a review of this movie out before I saw First Steps, but I thought I'd make up for lost time, and I'm going to use the month of August as a way for me to catch up on certain things that I was going to do in anticipation for certain new releases, but for time purposes and other reasons, couldn't really fit it in. So this is the first among my catch-up series, if you will, for the month of August. With spoilers and all, let's talk about Rise of the Silver Surfer. It was interesting to go back and watch this in hindsight, knowing how the plot of First Steps turns out, because right off the bat, this plot is very similar to what happens in First Steps, with Galactus, the Silver Surfer, coming to Earth to warn the people of Earth of their inevitable fate, or the supposed inevitable fate, and a certain death that happens at the climax of the movie, and the death of that character is undone when somebody heals them. Spoiler warning for First Steps: Sue dying at the climax of the movie with her son Franklin resurrecting her. The same thing happens in this one, but the Silver Surfer brings her back. Also, with the Fantastic Four being heralded as public heroes and saviors of their whole planet. This came out 18 years ago in the year 2007, and the comic book genre was in a really rough spot. You had this one and Spider-Man 3. Despite the cool to love mentality surrounding that film, and even this one, they weren't exactly well received upon release back then. The plot, like I said, is very similar to First Steps, where this cosmic entity is arriving on Earth, causing all these anomalies to happen, and they discover that it's working on behalf of something very sinister coming their way. The Fantastic Four are already established and they're beloved by the public, but there's also some uncertainty that people like Sue Storm are feeling amongst the team, that she's not really sure if this is the kind of life she wants to live. She and Reed are planning to get married. They can't complete the ceremony because of some media circus event that happens, causing her to even further question, is this really what she wants to do? And there's quite a few times where this pops up throughout the movie, whether or not we always have a choice, how can we live normally if all this chaos is happening around us, being the Fantastic Four. To be honest though, as much as this movie does have its moments, which we'll talk about, I don't really like this one as much as the previous one. In fact, I don't really care for it. And just to be clear, it is not Batman and Robin bad, and it's certainly not as bad as Fan4stick. I am not trying to say that that movie is on the same playing field of quality as this one, but it's not exactly high on my list either. On the one hand, I do like it's a very simple, straightforward plot, gets right to the point, and it's basically like another adventure for the Fantastic Four, like a TV show episode. I mean, the first film kind of felt like that, but it felt more like a movie in comparison. Another comparison that comes to mind is the 2009 Star Trek versus the Star Trek Into Darkness film, where the sequel to that felt more like a TV series, Into Darkness. But even that movie had some emotional weight behind it. Not that this movie doesn't have that, but in here it feels very shallow. And the first movie does have that similar shallow feel, but I felt like there was at least somewhat more of a genuine effort on that movie's part anyway. And it's more or less the same type of movie, although I think a little more cringe-inducing than its predecessor, such as the bachelor party scene where Reed makes a fool of himself in front of everybody there on the disco floor, and even moments where the crowd's just gawking at the sight of the Fantastic Four, like when Johnny and Sue switch powers and Sue is on fire, floating above the sidewalk in front of everybody. And that note, it kind of reminds me of Spider-Man 3, where the city is annoyingly looking up to Spider-Man. The difference is, though, the first two movies in the trilogy built towards the public finally appreciating what he's doing. And also the dancing scenes. This came out in the same year as Spider-Man 3, so it's hard not to notice that stuff, and both are cringe-inducing in their own ways, but Spider-Man 3 at least felt more like it was in character for someone like Peter Parker, who didn't really understand what it meant to be cool. Reed Richards is obviously a nerd like Peter Parker, but I felt like it didn't have the same effect as Spider-Man 3 did. Spider-Man 3 is not a great movie, but it at least felt more in line with what we expect Peter Parker to be like, or at least how he would perceive something like that to be. In fact, the review from RealViews.com called this movie so lackluster that it makes Spider-Man 3 look like a masterpiece in comparison. I'm inclined to agree with that. And the whole "we always have a choice" is something that we hear Peter say to Sandman in the finale of Spider-Man 3. I know I'm making a lot of comparisons between the two, but they came out in the same year, and they have very similar comic booky tones. So you can't really separate those two, as far as I'm concerned. Rewatching this movie last night, and a similar feeling I had back when I saw this at 17 years old, it's not really that good. Now, Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis, once again, are the highlights of this, just like they were in the first one. They have enough funny moments in there, and the camaraderie between the two, which is very different from what we saw between the two of them the first time around, that stuff is enough for me to keep myself from being too harsh on this one. And the moment where Johnny asks Ben about his relationship with Alicia.
How do you guys,
That's none of your business.
Okay, alright, I'm just concerned. Hate to wake up one morning and find out she was killed in a rock slide.
I'll show you a rock slide!
Always makes me laugh. Good God. Oh, and there's this interaction that Ben has with the grizzly bear.
Yeah, that's right. Keep running, boo-boo.
Oh yeah, as far as this callback to this moment in the first movie.
Sue, your clothes.
Why does this always happen to me?
Well, I guess she was hot.
And there's also the notion of Johnny being able to switch powers after he encounters the Silver Surfer when the Silver Surfer physically touches him. And I think it's kind of an interesting thing to throw in there. How would the Fantastic Four react if they were able to switch powers with each other? But that doesn't really go anywhere. It does come into play at least a couple of times, especially towards the finale when he takes on Dr. Doom. But with Johnny having all the powers of the Fantastic Four combined, I kind of wanted to see more of that. And to see Ben Grimm using the crane to knock Victor Von Doom into the Beijing Sea, knowing how Ben feels about Doom, that's not a negative in my book. The characters are more or less the same. Reed is still Reed, Sue is still Sue. I didn't really care for Jessica Alba. She's perfectly fine as an actress, but again, I've never really been a big fan of her portrayal of Sue Storm. Ioan Gruffudd gets the job done as Reed Richards. Chris Evans I still really like, but Johnny in this movie, I was kind of hoping at the time that they would have some sort of maturity with him, and he's more or less the same in this one, a walking, talking cliche. They introduced the notion of him maybe taking a step back before he gets someone killed when he switches his powers by accident when they have that near close call on the London Bridge when the Ferris wheel falls over. But again, like with the power switching stuff, that doesn't go anywhere. And he ends the movie more or less the same character, maybe slightly more mature, but there's not enough emphasis on some moment where he experiences a change of heart or some sort of sense of clarity. As for the Silver Surfer, Doug Jones physically plays him and Lawrence Fishburne does the voiceover. Basically the servant of Galactus and preparing the Earth for its ultimate destruction so Galactus can eat it in order to survive on energy. I do kind of like this aspect of it where Silver Surfer is the reluctant servant of this evil destructive force, but in comparison to First Steps, and I don't really like to compare these two, they do that much better in the recent one. Now I like Lawrence Fishburne in just about anything I've seen him in, and him as the voice of the Silver Surfer I think was a really good choice, even though I know in my mind that it's not him physically playing the part. Doug Jones I think is known for movies like Pan's Labyrinth or some other movie with Guillermo del Toro where he plays some aqua guy or whatever. I just looked it up, it's called The Shape of Water. I do kind of like his bond with Sue Storm and how she reminds him of the one he loves, and how his service to Galactus will spare his world and his wife, or lover, whatever she is to him, which also plays into him healing Sue after she gets stabbed by Victor Von Doom in the finale. And what he tells Reed right here, I gotta admit, it is kind of powerful in its own way, at least on my end, realizing that he doesn't have to serve at the mercy of Galactus and he rebels against him ultimately, or it. Which, by the way, why make Galactus a dust cloud? Even at 17, I didn't really know much about Galactus, and I still kind of don't now. Even back then, I thought, that is just weird. No. You could criticize how he's used in the recent film, but that felt more like a formidable force of nature to be reckoned with. As for Dr. Doom, his inclusion in here is so unnecessary. And if you saw the previous movie with the mid-credit scene, he was obviously going to come back in some capacity. If you were to save him for a potential third movie where he shows up for the big finale, I would have been okay with that there. But it's almost like a race to the finish line to get him back in here. And how he physically heals after the Silver Surfer throws his powers at him in the Arctic. Felt like that was kind of a missed opportunity where we could have seen him somewhat scarred up. Because I watched this video of Dr. Doom's origin recently and how he gets more and more scarred physically as time goes on. I think that could have been somewhat more interesting instead of seeing the quick fix of him going back to the way he was before. And again, why does he want the power so much? There's no emphasis on his backstory and what led him to this in the first place. He gets the surfboard, yeah, and that could potentially be a scary thought. But again, I don't really feel anything in regards to that. And Andre Braugher as the general who is rivals with Reed Richards, I don't really care about the general. He's just a typical military commander who's there to be some obstacle in the way of the main heroes. Now, this is not a knock against the actor who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but him along with his assistant, the captain, Frankie or whatever her name is, the one that Johnny shows interest in, I didn't really care about her either. And to be honest, I don't really know what Johnny sees in her anyway. The only time we really see her have some sort of humanity is in the finale when Reed and Sue finally get married. The rest of the movie, she just puts on this stoic bravado in front of everybody around her, and scolding Johnny for being a hotshot and almost getting his team killed. Is she attractive? I guess so. Not exactly my kind of woman, but what do I know? And as for Michael Chiklis as Ben Grimm, there's not much really to do with him. He's just there to be the comic relief and the most human person out of all four of them. I like that they did away with him not being so weighed down by the notion of him being a rock monster, although I kind of would have wanted to have some sort of underlying sadness there. They do show some of that in the recent film, and I know me comparing this one and the recent one is some sort of recency bias on my part. I kind of would have liked at least one moment or two, but still, Michael Chiklis in this movie, if there's any way to get him into Doomsday or Secret Wars for a multiversal event, I would not be opposed to that in the least bit. If they could bring back Chris Evans, Johnny Storm, and Deadpool and Wolverine, why not do the same thing for this guy? I mean, Ioan Gruffudd has been making the rounds on social media lately, celebrating the release of the new Fantastic Four. Is there a possibility of a return from him in Secret Wars? You never know. Jessica Alba, well, we'll see. But that would be kind of neat, though. Oh yeah, and also, like with the first one, there is a mid-credit scene where the Silver Surfer supposedly died after battling Galactus. It shows that he's still alive as he slightly goes off camera, his eyes open, and the surfboard goes back to him. A huge tease for a possible sequel, which unfortunately never came to fruition due to the poor performance of this movie critically and financially. And then a couple years after that with X-Men Origins, Fox decided to reboot the entire franchise altogether. But now we have Fantastic Four in the MCU, so it was all worth the wait as far as I'm concerned. I don't care what the box office numbers say about the recent one. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about Rise of the Silver Surfer. It's, at best, serviceable as a comic book movie and as a movie in general, and it's certainly much better than Fan Four Stick. Unfortunately,
it's not awful, but it's not good.
Yeah, more or less, unfortunately. That's all I have for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie if you've seen it. If you like what you see here, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more, and as always, see you guys in the next one.